Okay. Okay. Rimay Kulyaiki, Alinsuka, Alintuta, Imaynailam Kashkanki. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Hanss Lujan Torres. I'm from Cusco, Peru, and I'm the research coordinator for the Indigenous Futures Research Centre. And I'm so pleased to be here today to welcome you to this conversation with Abundant Intelligence's member, Mathias Becerra Sanchez. The IFRC is interested in responding to community-identified needs and dreams and growing the capacity of Indigenous researchers with the ability to conduct research in ways that are grounded in community, knowledge, values, and culture. One of our initiatives is Abundant Intelligences. So for those who may not know, Abundant Intelligences is an Indigenous-led research program that conceptualizes, designs, develops, and deploys artificial intelligence based on Indigenous knowledge systems. We are based at Concordia University, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyangahaga are recognized as the caretakers of this island known as Jojage, which has long served as a gathering place for the Roninshioni, Wabanakiak, Wendat, Anishinaabeg, and many other Indigenous nations and diverse communities. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future that shape ongoing relationships with Indigenous peoples and all those who share this place, known as Montreal. It's just a great pleasure to moderate this conversation, which turns toward Abiyala and toward my homeland of Peru, and engaging with the Quechua language, its histories, its futures, and its relationship to emerging technologies like AI. Before I hand things over to Matthias, I'll just outline some reminders and proceedings. This conversation is being recorded and will be available on the Abundant Intelligence's website at a later date. Following Matthias's presentation, we'll engage in a brief discussion and then open up for a Q&A. And you're welcome to write your questions in the chat, or if you want to ask them directly, you'll put your hand up and our team will unmute you. So really briefly, Matthias is an undergraduate student from Peru, currently pursuing a major in symbolic systems in the concentration of human-centered AI and human-computer interaction at Stanford University. His work focuses on technology to empower Indigenous and other digitally disadvantaged languages, both in Peru and Latin America. In his talk, he'll be presenting his research on STEM education, linguistics, and policy in globally disadvantaged language communities. Welcome, Matthias.
Thank you so much, Hans. It is truly a pleasure to be here. As you said, I'm an undergrad at the Stanford University studying SIMSYS, and it's a very multidisciplinary program where we apply technology and for multiple sections from AI, machine learning to social fields. In this case, it could be linguistics, philosophy, psychology, everything related to the mind. But in this case, my focus is the human-computer interaction in indigenous communities. In this case, the applications of redefining digital inclusion from my own work in Peru to how it could be expanded to other indigenous communities around the world. So I would like to start with saying Ayinyachu, hola, um, hi. We come from many different communities around the world, um, from many different languages and different meanings. And at the same time, we represent ourselves with these specific identities. We grew up in these communities, and however we were raised, these definitely change how our language is expressed or the opportunities we have, we can reach out to. For instance, I grew up in Cusco, very known for Machu Picchu, where it's very known for, for its ancient histories, for its rich culture, but at the same time, some biases about being a thing of the past. But I think, in my personal opinion, that we go beyond that. We come from a very rich community, from many different landscapes, languages, on a distinct flora and fauna. But as I said, I don't want us to be known as a thing of the past. We see many of these languages as things that we were spoken before. We always use the past tense to describe these things. To make it seem or to be as a goal that languages, indigenous languages, not only Quechua, are a thing of the future, are something that we should look forward to see its development with the current applications and currently tools that we have as part of our own resources, but at the same time, the different communities that surround us. First off, a bit of background. Quechua is one of the most widely spoken indigenous language family in the Americas. It has from 7 to 9 billion speakers. First of all, Quechua is a family of languages. That means that it has many different dialects, many different types and versions, depending on where you are located in Latin America. In Peru, we have, if I'm not mistaken, more than 10 to 15 dialects. It depends on the different source. But we also have communities around Argentina, Colombia, um, let's say Bolivia, Ecuador, etc., that have their different variations in vocabulary, in speaking, in their different expressions that represent the Quechua community. But as a bit of as a fact, Runasimi is how we call it in Quechua, as the language of or family of languages that come from the different sections of Runa, which means people, and Simi, mouth or language. So that's how it's formed, and we can see a little bit of how it's a structure. Um, yeah, sorry, I think my internet was a bit lagging, but I think you can see it now. But yeah, this is a bit of how we are. Now, a personal history of mine, of my own community and my family. Researches, I remember that when I was a child, I grew up in a small community called Lucre. I always visited with my family, and I always I always look around, with my own family, with when we were um, stocking. When we were stock, when we were harvesting our fruits, our different products for the next season. I used to see researchers come to our community to collect data on Quechua on and study our language. And I remember that we were very happy to have them as part of our community, as welcome them to analyze our different cultures, traditions, and the different grammatical structures and even meanings of specific words that we have as part of the Quechua community. And I remember that we had meetings, we had gatherings with these people that came from multiple foreign countries. And and I wanted with my family to share this tradition and knowledge with them. But as time went on, um, we we didn't receive any feedback or any retribution for the work that the comments, everything that we share with them. So they went back to their countries. They shared what they found with us to other people, and that's where it ended. There was never like a sort of input and output or any feedback or exchange of ideas between us. It was more like a study of humans in a way that there was not a sort of retribution between those both groups, especially those who are Quechua. So in a way, I wanted to change that. I was challenged by this idea of there's whenever we do an study, whenever we do research, it always has to be community centered. It always has to be human centered. And it always has to align with the goal of supporting the people you're working for, you're doing your research on. So that brings me to the work I have been part of these past couple of years, which involve a lot of different projects. But one of the first one was sort of an individual idea I had. I was very passionate in chemistry for chemistry back in high school. So I always wanted to look for a way to just brainstorm different ideas to be able to translate the periodic table that was mostly taught in Spanish back when I was studying in my school into Quechua. This idea arose because I knew that in my community we have a lot of terms that relate to many different elements from this periodic table, many different minerals, many different um, precious metals, etc. But there was never, or at least I didn't know about any specific documentation or book that collected all these different terminology or or things that people know from other different communities that a Quechua speaker can guide themselves from. So I decided to just brainstorm. I remember that I connected with a lot of Quechua speakers, not only in my own community. This happened in high school. So I decided to reach out to them via Facebook, via other emails, etc. And I wanted to have a way to collect all these different knowledge from different communities so that we can create a hub of creating focus groups between each other on proposed terms that could align to what is more specific or could be applied to all or at least most Quechua communities around Peru and other areas, other countries. So I remember that I had this idea, but we couldn't just jump directly to creating the periodic table. We needed to have conversations with other Quechua speakers. So we gathered in Zoom, I remember, and we started creating a spreadsheet of different terms. In this case, collecting everything that we know about what we mention in specific parts of our community, or everything that we heard or we have documented in specific books. And that became a sort of motivation for me to really have this centeredness focus for every single project that I have. And after conducting these interviews, if we call it that, focus groups with my own community and other Quechua speakers, we created, thanks to them, this first model or prototype of the first periodic Quechua table, a periodic table of elements in Quechua, in Quechua from Peru, in Southern Quechua. I already knew that there were other propositions of this in Ecuador, creating the sort of the same thing. It was sort of like um, a huge coincidence because I knew that they were working for in Ecuador for creating the same thing. They already published a paper, but I wanted to have a version of my own, creating with prepositions that related to my own community, but at the same time, an exchange of ideas between communities of my own and other Quechua dialects around Latin America. So this was a whole publication that I presented, mostly like a booklet, fully in Quechua that I presented at Peru Conciencia, which is one of these international scientific fairs that we have in Peru, one of the most prestigious. And then I wanted to continue more into this curiosity of mine into other organizations, from working and volunteering in organizations that combine science with indigenous languages like Quechua, or education for all, in this case being Clubes de Ciencia Perú, then Cama de Chachicuna that specifically focuses on empowering Quechua in STEM fields, in humanity fields, in research, and also teaching my language, teaching my own dialect and everything that I've learned for these past years to other people that wanted to recover more about their own traditions, Peruvians that have this Quechua heritage, but wanted to have more of this knowledge that this language knowledge that their family unfortunately didn't pass on them. So it was more a process of not only being able to teach these things to the knowledge I have for my own community, but at the same time helping others rediscover themselves through language. And that also led me to other organizations like the Quechua Alliance, which is one of the biggest Quechua organizations based in the US, around the world, that focuses on creating opportunities like gatherings, awards for Quechua initiatives around Latin America. Anyone that is creating content, digital content in Quechua. And we see some examples here that led to even more opportunities for being able to empower Quechua in these digital spaces. One of them, I remember, I think it was one of the most rewarding ones that I got the chance to um, be one of the workshop organizers as part of science clubs in Quechua, to be able to teach Quechua speakers how to redact their scientific papers, their scientific essays, so that they could present the knowledge that they have in their own communities, but fully in Quechua. In this case, I provided an example in Spanish just for them to see, but we had to teach about the different methodologies and how we can better translate them into Quechua. We created sort of a structure that allow us to have a better sense of a brainstorming of what we wanted to produce for their scientific papers or ideas. I remember that there were some magnificent professors that provided that were part of this community hub, this science clubs in Quechua, this group that were proposing about gathering different flora and fauna, documenting all these flora and fauna from their community, and sort of creating um, this booklet of collecting all these different pieces, all these different flowers, all of this like in a very traditional way, like just picking up the flower and sticking it into your book or in your diary so that you can write it all in Quechua and translate all the knowledge that your community knows about its healing properties, its abilities to create a specific traditional medicine, and everything related to documenting and preserving all that knowledge in this small booklet. So those were some ideas that I had. I remember that there were also some people proposing on revitalization, their specific dialect through workshops, through technology. And there were so many ideas that I was very fortunate to be part of by creating this small workshop. This is at the very top. But this also led to other more opportunities like presenting and writing my first academic paper or article, in this case for the Harvard Latin American Center, in this case with Professor Americo, that we sort of provided these ideas that we were working together. I worked with him in the Quechua Alliance, so we wanted to have that impact, everything that we worked together to a specific article, and that allowed for this opportunity to write something of our own, something that could show something about the different things that were happening during those years in Peru, but at the same time to provide an opportunity for uh, creators, indigenous creators, to provide their scientific experiences, their digital initiatives in Quechua, that led to the creation and writing of this article that was further published by Harvard, but at the same time that led to a panel which a lot of people participated and were exchanging ideas about everything that they produce for this specific series, this specific season of the magazine. Then perhaps around the time that I was doing those projects, I was also very motivated of not only focusing on Quechua, but looking for more a global perspective of what I could do with the languages I know, but also with my own passion for STEM education and bridging the gap between those who were never able to access it and those who want to learn both of these things, multilingual education and STEM education. So I founded Polyglot Science to be able to expand mentorship for low income and underrepresented communities who are passionate about these two specific fields. And since 2021, we have delivered programming in more than 5 languages, partnered with 3 JAWD organizations, and led different initiatives like coffee exchanges where people gather in Zoom, practice many multiple languages at the same time, from Quechua to Norwegian and other languages that we wanted to expand on because I believe that education should be expanded to everyone, regardless of your background, especially when it comes to language. And we should teach it. We should teach all these STEM subjects in these different languages, even though to those who have never been raised in those specific communities where the languages are spoken. So, if there's anyone that wants to migrate or have professional opportunities around the world and you need to speak a specific language for that, this is where Polyglot Science provides a mentorship, the ability to create more impact through your own capabilities of speaking multiple languages, but at the same time, perhaps creating impact to human-computer interaction, computer science, or the biological sciences. So we are a very multidisciplinary team. For now, we are on hold. We are on pause of our activities, but we are hopefully trying to resume things very soon, especially with applications of grants that we have been examining for the last couple of months. But we hope to resume things very soon. Then this relates more to the work I've been doing here at Stanford for many different organizations. But I think one of the most renowned could be Stanford Silicon and the Human Centered AI Institute. Um, a bit of the examples I can give is some of the work I've done this past summer, this last summer, last year summer, on conducting field work on many different small communities, rural areas in Peru to be able to really understand what specific digital technologies, tools I could be able to create for them to empower their specific dialects and terminologies and traditions. This is a bit of a combination of multiple partnerships that allow me to go back from the Silicon Initiative at Stanford, Advancing Digital Disadvantaged Languages, the Unicode Consortium, the Human Centre Institute at Stanford, and also UNESCO. Um, that also led to other more opportunities. If I remember, last year around November, that from these experiences that I had during my summer experience and collecting all this data that I'm going to talk a little bit more on this presentation with more detail, allow me to see all these different projects that I could do, and that led to my research presentation for the first time in a national conference in Minnesota, in this case, advancing indigenous communities in the STEM fields. And I remember that I won. I was part of one of the top winners in these presentations for being able to share about more about my own projects, but at the same time, all the work that I've done in this past summer, speaking with communities about their real needs, some technologies that I developed, some ideas, case studies, and the data I collected from a specific terminology that I took notes of when I interview Quechua speakers from Lamas, Cusco, some parts of Trujillo, and other people online. But that at the same time, after everything that I've done, I had even more questions about how can I be more closer, or how can I be able to fully fulfill the needs of my own community through, you know, by asking questions, by interviewing them. How can close collaboration in general with indigenous communities and for global language revitalization? I wanted to I wanted my work to be something that could have a global impact. And although I've been working with indigenous Quechua communities for these couple of years, I wanted to have this past summer experience to really identify how I can be able to create digital interfaces, user interfaces, apps, websites, or digital educational content so that this could be expanded to other indigenous communities around the world. Another question that I had is how can collaboration with Peruvian Quechua communities, but also indigenous communities around the world, create a framework that other languages communities can follow? Some of the methods that I use during my past experience working uh, this last year summer for the Unicode Consortium and the Silicon Initiative was conducting semi-structured interviews with indigenous language leaders. I remember that we had these small gatherings, the community had these small gatherings where they were providing instructions for everyone, their different roles in the community. So I decided to join. I speak Quechua, so for me it was a little bit easier to understand certain things that were being told to everyone and to be able to be respectful when it comes to asking questions or asking for specific studies or being part of explaining my whole idea of integrating myself into these communities and how I can be able to support them. But at the same time, analyzing historical and contemporary cases of terminology development, I already knew that there were a lot of linguists, a lot of researchers that had proposals of specific terminology guidelines that one should gather to be able to collect specific terms, not only focus on one specific dialect, but look for all different types of Quechua around Latin America when you want to officialize something, or when you want to create a neologism, which is like a sort of community approved terminology that doesn't have a direct translation from Quechua, from a next language, let's say Spanish, to Quechua. But at the same time, designing participatory workshops to map consensus building workflows. In this case, um, I asked directly the communities that I was talking to. I remember that I went to Lamas Tarapoto to ask, I presented myself, I introduced myself about what I wanted to do, about my projects, working with Unicode, working with the Stanford Silicon, And I I remember that I asked them what kind of things I could be able to support you, to support your language, to support our language, to be have a more digital presence from now on. And I remember that I was very surprised, but at the same time I felt this sort of empowerment when I heard that Quechua speakers want to be able to be part of the process. I already knew that, but at the same time, I'm very happy that they were more empowered to say that, in this case, that they wanted to have, the power to be able to design their own work technologies. I remember I asked a woman that she wanted, I asked her about what kind of things I could be able to create for your community, and she told me that she wanted me to teach her about what I know, what I learned about from Stanford, creating these apps, websites, so that these she can teach it to more children in her community, all these different apps, all these different programming technologies, codes, etc., so that these could be, passed on to her generations, and they could be able to know what specific things they need so that they could be able to design them themselves. And then a bit of summary of how I structure this initiative is, in this case, my goals were very simple. My aims were to elevate language communities by leverage and being involving them as active participants in the decision-making processes of approving a specific terminology, a specific tool that I wanted to propose to create for them. But at the same time, the vision, it was to build a more equitable and digital future where languages, not only Quechua, could be empowered and included in global technology standards. My motivation is very personal. I grew up in a small rural community speaking Quechua, hearing Quechua from my own community. So I wanted to be part of the process, but at the same time, I wanted to be part of the change in which I could be able to transmit all the knowledge that I'm gaining from Stanford to other communities that I belong to or that want their language to be fully digitally empowered or present. Some theoretical frameworks and methodologies. I use the participatory action research framework in this case, where I was the one who directed specific things, more the logistical stuff, but I wanted to be communities to be the ones leading me so I could know specifically what kind of needs they have for the things I could be able to create. When I told them perhaps I could create an app, a website, I didn't have any idea of exactly what everyone proposes that, but I wanted to have something more specific that could be able to really fulfill or help a need that the community has. Especially I remember in Cusco, going to different communities near Machu Picchu, Quechua communities that don't have easy access to healthcare. They wanted to have a sort of SMS website or SMS reminder so that instead of accessing an app that it's sometimes fully complicated, you can just receive a SMS message or using a chatbot that could easily guide you fully speaking Quechua um, to answer your needs or questions that you have about healthcare without needing an access to online internet sources. Then interviews, of course, focus group, as I mentioned, meeting people online, meeting people in Zoom and in person, of course, that really help a lot about on understanding what kind of things I could be able to start or learn from them so that I could be able to create these tools or teach them how to do themselves on a mix of methods of flowcharts, maps, in the case of collecting specific terminologies. And I'm sure I didn't mention this before, but Quechua is a agglutinative language, which means that you need to add a specific suffixes into a root so that it forms a whole meaning, or in this case, a whole sentence of different things that you want to express. Something like Turkish or other languages, Ottoman languages that have these different structures where you need to have a suffix that represents a specific meaning so that you can form a whole expression of what you want to say. So that I think in a way that makes Quechua a little bit more accurate when you want to express emotion, or in this case, systemize a sort of neologism that you want to create. Let's say you want to translate a specific word in Quechua, let's say science, that we didn't used to have. We didn't have it in a couple of years ago. But thanks to linguists, researchers, community from the people from Quechua speakers from their own communities, that were able to propose the chai chai as this new neologism to be able to fully translate Quechua, more specifically related to what Kamayete Chikuna has done in the past, as an example. And of course, all of this guided by human-centered and community-first principles, always respecting the indigenous communities, always listening, carefully listening to them so that you can really are able to understand what things are going through and how you are able to help. There are certain restrictions that one cannot go, for instance, I wanted to interview an elderly woman, one of the leaders from the Quechua community that I was visiting. But of course, it's a very limited time that she has. But at the same time, I didn't want to be like fully active in that part, that I didn't want to bother her in her time, her nap times. I want to be as respectful as possible. And those small things are extremely important so that you don't miss, or you don't lose trust between who you, the researcher, and the community that you are conducting research on or you want to help. So it's always very ethical focus, but at the same time human centered. So more details on this past summer. I mentioned that I conducted interviews, on-site interviews, online sessions, not only in Peru, not only traveling to Cusco, Lamas, Tarapoto, interviewing people from these communities, but at the same time, speaking with other communities that speak similar languages or that have a struggle with the same issues of Quechua. In this case, not finding a specific terminology to be able to translate a specific term in that language, like the case of Kafayat, that she speaks the Yoruba language from Africa, from her community, and she wanted to have this conversation and understanding how the different decision making processes are sort of a structure in my own community, but at the same time I wanted to understand what happens in her community, and understand her role as a translator, as a linguist, on making these decisions. She mentioned to me that they have like a sort of panel or like sort of gathering where they gather as a community from linguists, professors that are already working in her language for a really long time, to be able to really approve it with the community. In the way that they approve it is that they produce text, they produce different articles, they produce different books, especially just small samples, and then they spread it out to the community. So that they have tests with youth, with children, so that they could be able to read those specific words and passages and see if they really understand the word that um, they are trying to propose, especially like the community, like the committee that is deciding on these specific terms. And if the Jowd and the people that are being tested approve it and really understand that word, that comes, a success, because that allows for full publications around the community, and hopefully expand into other dialects of the same language. And yeah, let's go more into the process of what is the process of getting in a concept, word, or definition approved by a Quechua community. I mentioned what happens in the Yoruba community, but this changes a lot for the Quechua community because we struggle, not a struggle, but more we are challenged by specific structures of our own language. In this case, we start with a rough proposal. We start with saying, okay, we don't have the word for science, so let's create a huge spreadsheet in Excel to propose as many ideas as possible of whatever science can be a definition of, or if we already have these previous proposals from previous books, from documentation, from articles, let's gather all that information and just put it, as a rough draft. And after, everyone that has gathered, everyone that has been part of these focus groups, community hubs, we go into suffixes depending on if we want to add something more specific to the word or if we want to change the meaning. In this case, suffixes are one of the most important things in Quechua because they change the whole meaning, the whole definition of a word. So we start with recollection. We have in Quechua around more than 100, even up to, I can dare to say, to 200 suffixes. So there's a lot of involvement that the communities should do in order to be able to fully or accurately express something that has not been fully translated in the past. Then we go to common deliberation. I mean, in each step, we do not work alone. We work with communities. We work with professors, linguists, people who speak the language, so that, common deliberation is a smoother process of the whole documentation and decision-making processes for a word. So here is mostly just chatting, understanding what happens if we approve a specific term, if we add any specific suffix to change the meaning of a word, etc. And then this is more like the official section where the focus groups not only involves those who have analyzed and conducted this previous research, but also testing with more dialects and other communities that have not seen the proposal before, but perhaps could add a bit more ideas onto um, the term that we wanted to approve. In this case, could be more like, okay, you propose this word yachai chai or yachachi for science, but perhaps we could add a specific term and a specific suffix that we have in Ecuador's Quechua or Quichua, so that this makes sense to us as well, so that we have a more standardized way of seeing all these different meanings. But of course, that also struggles or that also is challenged by the different grammatical structures or reading ways of different dialects that we have. In Quechua, there's a lot of different ideas. There's a lot of things that we struggle with, but I think there are also many ways that we have many opportunities as perhaps as finding a standardized version, but at the same time respected every single dialect that we have. Because the South Quechua from, in this case, the Quechua that is spoken in Ayacucho, Cusco, and the Huaylas, Apurímac is not the one that is also spoken in Ancash, the Huanca Quechua, etc., all the central part of Peru, because they are sort of very different grammatically and how they're written, especially more in the central part of Quechua. They have more phonological terms, more suffixes, I can dare to say, and different variations of how to express things. So it's also a process of understanding what is best for everyone or a specific community. But that happens in the focus groups and decision-making process. And then it's the execution of use, in this case, where we already know the word that we want to produce. We already gather and came to a conclusion, a consensus. So now it's time to test it. In this case, either by, let's put a plan. You're gonna speak this word with your grandmother in your community, and you're gonna try to implement it in your daily vocabulary to test if this is something understandable for them. If they are gonna ask you about what you're saying, or even during publications, in this case, creating small samples of poetry, of articles where you can share them with your own community to test if they really understand. This sometimes happens in pilots of books that are being translated into Quechua in small rural communities. So they wanted to see if they understand or if they could be able to infer these specific definitions of the word for the words that are being proposed as official terminology. But well, it's a whole process to go to raw proposals to final publication and diffusion. And then, as I mentioned, I was creating this STEM terminology curricula for educational app curricula. I wanted to create not only to have the proposal of the periodic table, but I wanted to expand it to have more to something that everyone could use around Peru, something that could be able that anyone can propose, and at the same time could be used to create different apps for children to learn about chemistry in their own classrooms, speaking Quechua, of course. So this is an example of the spreadsheet that we were proposing, all the different sources that we gather from the raw proposal, what it means, the macro variant, in this case, the group, if we could call it like that, of where the Quechua belongs to, the specific variant, where it's specifically located within the country of observation, of proposal, some additional examples used in sentences, um, some arguments to justify those things, and at the same time, it's not here, but suffixes that are used as well that we can propose to. Um, then, speaking of suffixes, as I mentioned, there are so many suffixes, and depending on where you are, depending on the book you have, these could definitely vary, and they have so many specific nuances of meaning depending on how you speak, depending on in which specific situation you're using it, that sometimes there's not a standardized version for all the different suffixes that we have in Quechua. But as I'm seeing here, as I'm showing here an example, we've gathered with an organization all these different suffixes from, in this case, reading different books, official publications from linguists that they gather the meanings of different dialects in Quechua. So as part of this was creating this spreadsheet so that we were able to collect them hand by hand, all these different definitions and compare them all so that we can create more a sort of a standardized educational material collecting and informing the speaker, the learners that want to get more involved into Quechua so that they could see the whole scope of meanings that they have. But it's still in construction and not fully available at the moment. But I hope that in some years from now, we can have everything here fully filled so that it could be able to be shared publicly for everyone and everyone could be able to use it. Um, as I mentioned, focus groups, perhaps the most important thing of this project is speaking with the community, really understanding their needs, creating case studies of what has worked in the past, what is not working, and in general, being able to really listen the different needs, different challenges, problems that your research could be as of support for them. And then we go to the implementation process. This is a small prototype that I created for this presentation, but also as like a sort of build up that I was doing for a class. And this is Minkai, which is this experimentation, because I wanted to create an app that sort of follows the standards, the global standards of the Unicode Consortium, but at the same time that provides an opportunity of a prototype that how can a community center approved app would look like? In this case, something that the community could be used, that is comfortable of using, and at the same time, not only helps you learn Quechua, but also helps you to connect with other Quechua speakers, and even perhaps in the future to serve as the foundation of to other indigenous languages around the world. So yeah, this is like a sort of version of a more community-centered Duolingo where you are able to learn Quechua and other Latin American dialects of the language. Um, this is also another prototype. This is what we created in the past with other Quechua speakers that I worked with in the past, especially in my last summer. As I mentioned, I wanted to teach them about the most recent AI tools, the most recent programming tools that they could be able to experiment with so that they could create their own resources. And this was a sort of example I did so that we can, I could teach what I know to them so that they could be able to create more of those things. In this case, it was a website to be able to sort of save all your different learning goals of learning Quechua day by day. In this case, we put specific goals for a child, so that they could collect. They put set their different goals to empower their own Quechua traditions and languages. In this case, it was more like a to-do list section, but more gamified. Yeah, this is an example. It's a prototype for now. Then This is more an inspiration to all of you. We know that AI tools, different programming skills are more fully available online, and that shouldn't impede indigenous communities to create their own work of their own. In this case, I motivate you to, to do whatever fills your heart that should be empowered. Perhaps you want to empower your own community through creating educational apps, websites, but also technology is so big that you can also create games. In here, I'm citing some of the amazing work that CVA Peru has done, which is an organization that brings together and supports video game studios so that they could create, the games of their own, compete in this very global contest where they can propose their different proposals, the different games and demos, and of course at the same time showcase traditions from their own community, specifically to the Quechua and Conibo, Shipibo Conibo communities from the Amazonian part of Peru. We see some examples here of the work they've done. And by the way, all of those games are fully available, fully playable. They are not mine, but I could share more resources after our meeting if you want to test them too. And I said before, implementation. This not only applies to education, but as I mentioned, to other fields like gaming, healthcare, where everyone should be part of and understand what things could be improved, especially more importantly, the speakers themselves, the Quechua speakers, indigenous communities that we want to have an impact on so that they could be able to provide fully the feedback that we should implement for further versions of whatever we're creating, whatever technology we are developing. After, gathering that feedback, applying it, improving your product, we should start with diffusion. In this case, sharing whatever you've had created to have a better impact to other communities, which is the goal of this presentation. In this case, whatever you have created for your community, you should be able to share it. You should be able to serve as inspiration to other indigenous communities that have been working in the past and perhaps could feel inspired what we are currently creating. We have already a lot of media, a lot of social networks where we could do that. So why not? Let's just start creating and sharing more about what we know. Yeah, some final takeaways that I have is that we should always integrate community leadership, open source technology, and policy advocacy to reduce digital inclusion, not only in Quechua communities, but for everyone that speaks a digital disadvantaged language. Learn and be part of the community experiences to really listen. Support multilingual curricula, accurate medical and legal translation. This is extremely important, as I said before. If we really listen to what is happening in whichever community we're currently working on, we could realize that perhaps there's bigger struggles, bigger challenges that have come from past generations that could not be fully fulfilled at that moment, but we could be sort of the support system where we could be able to understand these issues by listening carefully what is happening and creating something that empowers technology for the good of that community. And finally, align technology innovation with cultural knowledge. If we want to design something for indigenous community, we have to be very careful about how we express ourselves. But at the same time, if we want to use art for this specific community, we should always ask how they design it, which perhaps we should always have someone who supports in that specific section who is part of the community. If you want to design a game and you want to use textiles in your game as part of the different 3D frameworks that you create, you should always ask the community what are the different meanings of the different textiles or the different rituals that this community have so that you could be able to fully represent it in your product or with whichever project you are creating. And finally, we should serve as this example for other global communities to represent themselves digitally and works toward a more community-led initiative and goal to be able to share our knowledge with everyone. And yeah, those are some final references that I have. This is everything that I have for you tonight. So thank you.
Woo! Thank you so much, Matthias. That's wow, there's so much to absorb in this presentation, and just to commend you on this really important and also just beautiful work. It's very layered, and I really appreciate the community-centered focus that you're bringing to your research, and just all of the stuff you've done so far is so exciting. Um, yeah, and there's so many little bits and morsels that I'm still thinking through, but one of them is actually just I really appreciate the approach to polyglot science that you're using. I was chatting with my aunt who's in Cusco right now. She has an NGO called Atikunmi, and they go into this little town called Hapura, which is by Vinicunca, which is like Rainbow Mountain for those who are familiar with that very touristic space. But she was chatting with some of the communities there and asking them like, what do you actually want or what do you need from us as an NGO? And she was surprised to hear that the community members wanted ways to teach English to their children. They wanted a way for them to be able to communicate with the tourists so that they're not just, photo ops or they're not just distance, but actually they can communicate back or have those engagements. But from hearing your presentation, I think like we have all the technology for people to learn multiple languages. It doesn't just have to be English. It can be German or Swiss. Like all of these things are now available, and not limiting communities, to think just one through one lens, but through multiple lenses and make that as accessible as possible. So yeah, that sounds really exciting. I was thinking though too about like just the Quechua language in particular, well, a lot of indigenous languages, but I think Quechua too, like it's a very relational language. Like when I think about like translating words, for instance, like Pachamama, which it doesn't just mean earth, but it's also time and space. Or like Ichu, which is like hay, but it's not just hay, it's like it's what the llamas eat, and also it's like a tool to build multiple things, including like a bridge. How do you find like AI being able to translate these more nuanced understandings of words or of concepts um, from one language to the other? Are you encountering that in your research?
That's an excellent question. I think that first of all, we should see as Quechua as a family of language in this case that it's very varied. We have so many dialects. So if perhaps we want to start working for Quechua, perhaps we could start with one dialect at first and then to be able to expand it to a more generalized structure of how we could use AI to be able to translate better. But I think one specific tool that could be able to serve as one of the bridge between those two things, especially using text to speech or speech to text, could be NLP or natural language processing. In this case, how we are able to translate or using the tools as Google Translate is doing, so that whenever a Quechua speaker wants to have an easy translation from, Quechua to Spanish or have something easier or accessible to be able for them to understand. Um, how can we develop those tools? I see for now some ideas. I already have some ideas in mind for specifically for the application I show for Minkai. I was actually developing um, one of those things here. Let me see it here. Um, okay. Hmm. Oh, here, perfect. I think you can see it here in this video, but this is a small dictionary that whoever one wants to use, and anyone can write a specific definition in English or other languages to be able to be translated into Quechua. And that applies like in reverse too, in which you have whichever speaker, this is translated in 30 languages. So whichever language you come from, you can translate it easily into Quechua. But that also involves APIs, in this case fully digitalizing dictionaries so that we can have a sort of database where all these different things, all these different terms, the AI could be able to follow as tokens so that, it could produce a specific, very accurate translation for the Quechua dialect that you're focusing on. But yeah, as I mentioned before, it could be a challenge because we don't have a specific standard for all the different varieties that we have, but we could start with at least one or a group, a subgroup like the Southern Quechua, so that we can have a sort of idea how that would look like.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, very exciting. This app sounds amazing. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking about too, like, I don't, it feels like at least here in North America, there's a lot more discussions about like the environmental impacts of AI technologies. And like, I don't think this is part of your research per se, but I'm just curious if you've encountered those sort of concerns from the communities that you're interviewing. You know, are they kind of seeing, just, I'm thinking about how Peru is such a fragile country in regards to climate change. You know, we see so many earthquakes and rivers drying, certain like nevados or glaciers are kind of like drying up, which and you know, we're thinking about them. And from a cultural perspective too, like mountains aren't just mountains, but they're sacred, right? They're apus. Or when you have like an abundance of water, that is like that means something special. That's a sacred land. And so, yeah, I'm just curious when introducing these sort of technologies, if that's also something that you're seeing the communities think through, or if that's something that through research that's also being discussed.
Yeah, I think my internet was a bit lagging a bit, but what I understand from the question is how we can be able to fully respect traditions or these specific values of meanings of the Quechua communities if we're fully being able to better represent them in specific technologies in AI. Is that right?
I was mostly also thinking about like just the environmental impacts of AI, like if that's a
Yeah, yeah.
discussion that communities are also thinking through now.
I see. Yeah.
But open-ended too. I'm just curious to see where you kind of are noticing those dialogues in not just your research at Stanford, but also in the communities that you're speaking or with the communities that you're speaking to.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Whenever I had the chance to travel to all of these regions in Peru, I don't remember we had those specific conversations. I think they were more open to hear what I was trying to propose. But I remember I had one specific conversation related to it, which it was one of the, these elderly representative for the community that she asked me, okay, we are using AI, but at the same time, you should remember that each prompt, wastes a lot of water whenever you want to create something or you want to do vibe coding that involves a lot of water waste. So how can we are able to fully utilize these tools without damaging our own communities? In this case, where are you getting that water from to create these tools? Are you getting it from our communities? Are you, wasting our water? What are things? I think those things arose when I had these conversations of how we're using AI, how at the same time can we protect Pachamama? Because as you mentioned, Pachamama is a very sacred meaning. It's a very sacred, let's say, sort of motivation or sort of a specific meaning that relates to the Quechua community. So I wanted to be as respectful as possible to fully explain what is happening, that the water doesn't come from, from your community, but from the whole computers is the other computers is that I'm not sure where they are located, where they waste a lot of water at the same time. But it's also a different process of, as you mentioned before, it's explaining those specific technicalities when you have these conversations to be fully respectful if there are things that don't align, but at the same time to be as community as possible, to break down all of these pieces to be able to fully make yourself understandable to the community.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also another really important point you bring is just digital inclusion. You know, I think it's important to bring these communities to these technologies and these technologies to these communities because we're already in it, you know. We're living in a hyper saturated world with that's seeing AI develop so fast. And so it's important to have these voices present or at least be involved in its development. So that, you know, these decisions, these more holistic, these more grounded and relational decisions can be made. Um, I'm
Yeah.
curious if there's any questions in in the audience or Q and A's. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put your hand up or or type it in the chat. Um, while people are asking questions or thinking about their questions, I'm also just thinking about your time now at Stanford and like how that's been so far. I think there's something to be said about doing research about your community, but also having a bit of perspective or like distance from it too, so that you can see things from different perspectives and also from being informed by different understandings. So I'm just curious how that's been for you so far.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think Stanford is known for being a very tech-forward university in the case that they always want to have the most updated technologies to be able to be taught in different courses, but at the same time, uh, anything that you can interact with that relates to AI and technology. So what I'm doing now is to take advantage of these resources, getting into these different courses that relate to human-computer interaction. I actually started at the Stanford with the idea of that, oh, I want to create AI. I want to do something related to, just fully translating using LP to translate into languages. I wanted to have this idea of just being like a sort of computational linguistics major or something like that. But I think that as I discovered myself into the university, I wanted to have more this humanistic focus onto my career. I'm not only a symbolic systems major, but I'm also a human rights minor, which also aligns to my mission of working for AI, but in this case, in its ethical side, in working in creating policies for indigenous communities so that they could have better access to education, and access to healthcare and law. So I think what I'm doing now is making the best I can of all the resources I can grab, I can apply to, but at the same time working for my community in the way that whichever thing I know, I want to teach it. I think that also aligns to my future career goals, where I would like to be a professor, perhaps pursuing a PhD, and at the same time to have a better representation of indigenous Quechua leaders at these institutions where they can have a voice in creating these technologies that produce actual change for language, for policy. So yeah, that's those are some of my ideas, but I'm not sure where I'm headed to. So we'll see how it goes.
No, that sounds great. And I mean, just so vital because I think, I think there's research being done about Quechua language in communities, but it's so new and so important, I think. Um, so yeah, I guess if we don't have any other questions, maybe we'll wrap it up. Last call. Yeah. Okay, well, I just have some quick thank yous to give out. So, first of all, thank you so much to Matthias for this really rich conversation. We want to thank Hazel and Sabrina and Julia and Jill and the big and mighty team at Abundant Intelligences for making this happen. Thank you to Milo and Tarcisio for their visuals and promotion, and our co-directors Jason Lewis and Hannah Claus for their support. If you're interested in participating in future events, both of at the IFRC and Abundant Intelligences, keep in touch with us through social media. You can find us on Instagram at Indigenous Futures RC or at Abundant Intelligences. And we also have a newsletter that goes out every month, and you can find it on our website at ifrc.ca. So, yeah, thank you so much, Matthias, and all the best to you and all your research. Can't wait to see more.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Tu pananchikama.
Good night, everyone.